Welcome to Shooting Straight, AONF.com. I'm Frank Miniter, the editor-in-chief of the NRA's America's First Freedom. Hey, we have the incredible pleasure sitting down with Larry Keane, General Counsel for the National Shooting Sports Foundation, and he has another title that's too big for me to actually say. No,
I'm the Senior Vice President for Government and Public Affairs, and I'm also the Assistant Secretary for NSSF, and I wear a bunch of hats in SAMI as well. So
you do it. Right now we're here at the SHOT Show in Las Vegas, the big happening every year for the firearms industry, for our freedom. There's something like 50,000 people, all the movers and shakers from around the United States, but around the world.
Around the world,
are
yes.
Here.
Yeah.
I've lost count of how many square feet are down there. Several miles, I think, of booths.
About 13 miles of aisles of exhibit space. We are up to about 820,000 square feet, rough numbers. And we're north of 50,000. We'll probably be in the ballpark of 52 to 53,000 attendees, 2,500 exhibitors, and we have about an $88 million economic impact on the economy in Vegas every year. We have exhibitors from all over the world, like 127 plus countries. Military, law enforcement, domestic, foreign. So it's the biggest show of its kind for the industry by far. And it's also now the third largest show that Las Vegas does every year. And it's the 8th largest show in North America, trade show. And we're certainly by far the biggest event that the Venetian Expo does every year. We have been for many years. And now we occupy space next door in Caesars Forum, which is the biggest columnless ballroom in America or North America, maybe the world, I don't remember. But we've got all that space over there as well, which is why we're up to biggest show we've ever had in terms of square footage.
So this is the gun industry. Since COVID happened, of course, all these kind of shows went way down. Here we are, it feels like times of old. It's really moving. There are well over 100 million gun owners in this country. Millions and millions more since 2020 have gone after their freedom. Lots of polls showing the number of gun owners way up, the number of guns in homes way up. People embracing their freedom, taking their freedom more and more. This is the real gun industry that we have right here.
Yep.
So I'm anxious to talk to you because of all the attacks we're seeing now on not just on the gun industry, but on gun dealers, on gun owners, doing all they can to suppress what we have and this freedom that we cherish.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the show is back to well beyond actually pre-COVID. We were able to get the 2020 show in before COVID set in, but we couldn't have a show in 21 because of the pandemic. And then we started back in 22. It wasn't quite as big, because a lot of people were still concerned about COVID. But last year we were really fully back, and this year will be fantastic. So, we're really excited about that. It's important because it's helps. It's a major revenue stream, as you can imagine, for NSSF, and it allows us, and my team to address, these attacks on the industry. And the attacks on gun owners and dealers and the Second Amendment, which is ongoing. These are really very challenging times between, a hostile administration, openly hostile administration, and an ATF, that is going after trying to revoke as many dealers as they can. We have this, whole of government attack by the Biden administration. It's not just ATF. We see it with, BIS on exports and all these things that were in the executive order last March. So, and then, you turn to the states and we, dealing with challenges in the states in places like California, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, the Northeast, and now, we're seeing severe challenges in New Mexico, which was not a state we used to, really worry about very much. But now we've got a governor there that doesn't respect the Second Amendment. She thinks that she's the queen and can just issue edicts without due process, even though they trample on constitutional rights. So it's a very, very challenging environment.
Well, let's start with the Protection of Lawful and Commerce in Arms Act The Biden administration wants to repeal it, and they often lie. Even the Washington Post has called them out on these lies.
Yeah.
They lie and say this is some kind of blanket protection for the gun industry. What if it was passed in 2005 and signed by former President Bush? Why don't you tell people what that is, why it's so important, and why Biden wants to take it away?
Well, you're correct that Biden's, I think he's got more Pinocchios than any president in the history of America. So the Lawful Protection, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act was passed in 2005 and signed by President Bush. And really, it is just simply a codification of, American jurisprudence with respect to tort reform. Manufacturers of any products are not responsible under the law for the criminal misuse of their non-defective, lawfully sold products. And that's really what the law does. There are certain exceptions for well-recognized causes of action, like negligent entrustment. So if someone were to, sell a gun to a person who was drunk, the same way if you gave the keys to your car to somebody who was drunk, you'd be responsible. And things like product liability claims, if the product was defective, those are legitimate claims and not barred by the law. So yes, even the Washington Post and other liberal publications have, fact-checked the president repeatedly on these lies that he makes. I'm sorry, it may sound harsh, but if you make a slip of the tongue and you get fact-checked, okay, one time. But when it's habitual and you get fact-checked, that's a lie. It's purposeful, it's intentional, which is, not surprising, but still disappointing that you would have a president of the United States lie to the American public the way he does. So there are constantly attacks from the gun control groups. They want to repeal it. The votes are not there to repeal it. Again, it passed by broad bipartisan margin in 2005. And what brought it about was the lawsuits filed by Democrat-run big cities, with one exception, New York, which was by Rudy Giuliani. And so people say, well, why does the industry get this special protection? Well, no other industry was being sued this way and being blamed for the actions of criminals. So it's very important. It's the single most important piece of legislation to the industry, and I think to the Second Amendment, because had it not passed, could have resulted, these lawsuits could have resulted in the destruction of the firearms industry. And it's the firearms industry that makes the exercise of the Second Amendment right possible for law-abiding Americans. So very, very important.
I've read the PCLA and PLCAA, and I've even printed it out. It was like 5 pages long. It's not one of these bills like what Washington
No, it doesn't go
passes.
on. Yeah, it's
very explicit. It's very clear that it doesn't protect if they make a faulty product, if they break some law.
Right.
It doesn't protect them. It just protects them from a third party, someone who gets that product and uses it in a legal way.
And that's what we've seen. That's what the city lawsuits were about. These criminals misuse guns, so you, the industry, are responsible. And we're seeing it right now. I mean, the City of Gary case, for example, which was filed back in 1999, which is one of the 40 or so lawsuits filed back then, is still alive today, a quarter of a century later. The industry is still defending that case. And the lawsuit by the government of Mexico against the industry, filed by a gentleman who used to work for the Brady Center, John Lowy, who was involved in the city lawsuits back in the late 90s, early 2000s. He's a career anti-gun activist lawyer. The government of Mexico is suing the industry, making exactly the same allegations that we see raised in the City of Gary case, in the other city lawsuits that have been dismissed as frivolous, and some of them based on the PLCAA. Unfortunately, just yesterday, the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit sitting in Boston reversed a ruling by the district court that had dismissed the government of Mexico's lawsuit against the manufacturers, all the major manufacturers, and several distributors that, again, tried to blame the industry for the misuse of firearms by drug cartel gangs in Mexico, illegally acquiring firearms in the United States and elsewhere, and smuggling them illegally under U.S. law and Mexican law into Mexico. So they blame us. They try to scapegoat the industry for the either inability or unwillingness of the Mexican government to bring Mexican criminals to justice in Mexican courtrooms. And so it's very frustrating. I have to say, in my view, personally, that the Mexican government is corrupt, that Mexico is actually a failed state, and it is essentially run by the cartel. At least large parts of the country are not run by the Mexican government. And so, they should be focusing, internally and bringing these cartels to justice, not trying to blame, industry members for legally selling a product protected by the Second Amendment in the United States. This idea that the industry is somehow purposely marketing guns to the cartels is, absolutely absurd, patently false, and frankly, highly offensive.
Which is what's going on. And Mexico is actually suing gun makers in the United States for crimes happening inside Mexico that under their watch.
Right. And meanwhile, they don't do anything to, interdict these guns coming into Mexico. They don't check southbound vehicles. Their border patrol agency, because they're under the influence of the cartels. And so, again, the border with Mexico is not controlled by the Mexican government. It's controlled by the cartels.
Meanwhile, the average person in Mexico has a very hard time defending themselves.
That's exactly right. The irony is that if you read the Mexican Constitution, it actually has language in it that is very similar to our Second Amendment. Of course, it's just not, it's lip service. It's very, very difficult for a Mexican civilian to own a firearm. There's only one gun dealer in all of Mexico, in Mexico City, and it's run by the Mexican government. So, and they like to talk about, so many guns that were traced, were originally sold in the United States. Well, yeah, that may be true, but they were smuggled into Mexico by the gangs, right? These are not guns sold legally in Mexico. They're being smuggled into Mexico by criminals. And, that's unfortunate, and we certainly don't want to see it, but you can't blame, a law-abiding manufacturer for what goes on there. And by the way, the Mexican government has also filed a lawsuit against 5 dealers in Arizona, blaming those dealers. And I know for a fact, talking to former ATF agents, that those dealers regularly, and have for a very long time, cooperated with ATF and provided ATF with information that led to trafficking investigations. So the notion in that lawsuit that those particular dealers are somehow purposely and willingly selling guns to gun cartels is demonstrably false.
If they do, or if they are, please, ATF, investigate them, put them out of business.
Absolutely. But, this one agent, and he was a group supervisor in the Phoenix office, very, very well known, famous gentleman, who was a whistleblower in the Fast and Furious case. When I spoke to him and he said, he knew those dealers and they were all cooperative. They weren't corrupt. They weren't selling guns to bad guys. He said in his entire time, he only encountered one corrupt dealer, and they put that guy out of business and put him in prison.
Good.
But he's the one who blew, one of the 2 people that blew the whistle on Fast and Furious and became a whistleblower and testified in Congress about it, where it was actually ATF and the Department of Justice that were purposefully allowing guns to be smuggled across the border into Mexico. And by the way, in violation of U.S. law under the Arms Export Control Act, and nothing was done about it.
Right,
and it resulted
in
and Eric Holder, and it resulted in a border agent, Brian Terry, being murdered with one of those guns that ATF purposely allowed to go over the border.
Right. So let's switch this a little bit, because we're talking about the important topic here on FFLs, our gun dealers, which the Biden administration is targeting on paperwork errors and everything they can find to a largely law-abiding gun dealer. If they break a law, please go after them. But on a paperwork error, you're supposed to work with them or try to find a way through it. Instead, they're trying to get They're trying to pull these gun dealers away.
Yeah, they've got this quote unquote zero tolerance policy. And again, if somebody is a bad apple, right, they should be prosecuted and their license should be revoked. But what we have seen is many, many instances that where in the past ATF would have worked with the dealer to educate them, on the mistakes that they made, because they weren't really truly willful, right? They were paperwork errors. Somebody made a mistake. Now they're, revoking their license. Just this morning, I read a case involving a dealer who had his license revoked for 2 mistakes. One was, and it was an auction house, that they transferred firearms to somebody who had an out-of-state CCW. And so, they were a law-abiding person. Now you're not supposed to take a CCW from out of state, right? That's a mistake. But, some dealers have made that, didn't realize it had to be an in-state concealed carry permit. So that's a mistake. They could be educated on that. In the past, that would not have been a violation. And in this case, there was no allegation that, those guns that were transferred to those law-abiding citizens represented any kind of public safety risk, right? They had a concealed carry permit. So to me, why are you revoking that person's license? There was no threat in that situation, to public safety. And they made another mistake where they sold 5 guns, I think it was, to one person as part of an estate sale, and they didn't file a multiple sales report as they're required to at the close of business that day. The person said, I'll do it in the morning, which is a mistake, but there's no allegation that, that person passed the background check, right? There's no allegation those guns ended up in the hands of criminals or anything like that. To me, that's why are you revoking that dealer's license? There's really no reason for that. And that's just one example of what we view as excesses and ATF being overly aggressive under this zero tolerance policy to revoke licenses. We also see a lot of licensees who get inspected and then ATF pressures them to surrender their license in lieu of going through a revocation hearing. And so we've seen a big increase in that as well, and that's troubling, right? It's unfortunate because the result of this policy is that dealers are unwilling now, as they used to, call ATF and sort of self-report, make a voluntary disclosure. I think I made a mistake. Did I do this right? And get it corrected and learn how to do it correctly. They're not doing that like they used to. And the other thing that you're not seeing as much is, as I mentioned before, the dealers are the number one source of information to ATF that leads to trafficking investigations. Well, if you're a dealer now under this, why are you going to invite any scrutiny by ATF that might result in you losing your license? So they're not providing that information to ATF anymore because they're afraid that it's going to result in an inspection and they may lose their license for some mistake they didn't even know they made.
It's become political.
Why
would they
absolutely.
invite it at this point? And that's unfortunate because they're on the front lines in that regard.
They are literally the front lines, right? They used to be viewed as ATF's partner, and ATF gives lip service to that, but that's just not the feeling that FFLs have now. And I would say that the relationship between ATF and the industry is really at a low point in my now almost 25 years of working at NSSF.
Unfortunate because we should all be working together.
I agree, and we continue to work with ATF where we can on things like Don't Lie for the Other Guy. We're actually doing a Don't Lie for the Other Guy launch in Vegas tomorrow, and the director is going to participate in that press conference and press event because we don't want firearms being illegally acquired through straw purchases, and that is a very important point. It's a straw purchase. And that's illegal, but it doesn't mean it's an illegal sale. It's not a straw sale. If the dealer has no idea, the person lies on the form. That's why it's called Don't Lie for the Other Guy. It used to be called Lie and Buy. They're deceiving the dealer on the paperwork, right? So, but it's just assumed that the dealer's a bad guy because someone, lied on the form and They don't have crystal balls. There's no, blood test they can give the person at the counter to make sure they're not lying, right? Like you just have to use your sixth sense, whether it feels right or not, or there's something going on, but we continue to work with them on the Don't Lie program because it's important. And we're working with ATF on another program called Operation Secure Store, where it's helping to address the issue of smash and grab burglaries, which are done by gangs, typically involving youth who can't be prosecuted in federal court if they're apprehended. And ATF approached us a number of years ago and said they noticed an increase in smash and grabs, and could we work with them to address this? And we said absolutely, and we launched Operation Secure Store to raise awareness among dealers, to take measures that are appropriate for their store that they can afford to secure their inventory, to make them less vulnerable to burglary, to create, obstacles to the bad guys being able to access the firearms, because building time, allows police to respond if the alarm is triggered and things like that. So we continue to do that. We monitor those numbers with ATF, and so we work and educate the retailers on that. And we make an audit available. They can do a self-audit, or they can hire. We helped underwrite the cost to bring in a professional, retail security professional to come in and look at their store and say, these are the measures you can take, whether it's, everyone's different, right? Smash-resistant display cases, move the safe over here, put gates on the window, put bollards out front, but not everybody could put bollards, right? If you're in a strip mall, you don't own the store, you don't own the property, you can't just go put bollards, right? The landlord's not going to want that, and the landlord may not want, you having the store look like Fort Knox, right? That's not attractive to the other, for customers going to other tenants. But there are things you can do to make your inventory less vulnerable to theft. So,
well, the ATF is a part of the Department of Justice.
It is.
And the Department of Justice, historically, and the last few decades especially, has not gone after the straw purchasers in particular enough. Instead,
Correct.
Now they're overpressuring firearms dealers, gun dealers, which they should be working with, instead of prosecuting enough of these real bad guys.
Well, we see that in where we did not support the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, but there were some provisions in there that we thought were good policy. One of them was to create a standalone federal law for straw purchasing and a standalone law for illegal firearms trafficking. So those were good things. But we have long been frustrated by the fact that when you see somebody arrested and prosecuted for straw purchasing, the sentences are frankly laughable, right? It's probation or a couple of months. It's like, wait a second, the law says they can get up to 10 years and you're giving them probation when, they participated in an illegal straw purchase that put a gun in the hands of a bad guy. That's ridiculous to us. So, we are very frustrated by that. And then, we see a lot of times where the U.S. Attorney's offices are not prosecuting these cases seriously, which is unfortunate.
Instead of treating the bad guys as bad guys, they want to treat gun dealers and law-abiding gun owners as the problem.
I mean, they're going after, dealers, putting them out of business. It doesn't really help. I mean, it used to be that ATF had a true focus on public safety. And, special agents worked with dealers to make cases. I mean, dealers will allow ATF to come in and put somebody undercover behind the counter. They will, call ATF or the person's in the store, and ATF will say, things like, okay, tell them that the next transaction is delayed and, you're waiting on the response. And, when we get there, we'll let you know, and then you'll, go through with the sale, and then we'll follow them. But they don't want to arrest them in the parking lot, because then the dealer can go back, and it puts the dealer at risk, right? So, but that's the kind of thing that people used to do, allowing ATF come in and record and put listening devices in to record the transaction. And that's the kind of cooperation you want. But when you're going after people on these ticky-tacky mistakes, that's not helpful, right? That sours the relationship when it should be collaborative. We all want the same thing. We don't want bad guys getting guns.
Absolutely, and that's focused in the wrong place. Going after the good guys instead of the bad guys. So let's shift gears again, because there's another thing going on that baffles me, is that the Biden administration has banned imports of certain guns.
And exports, right? We're seeing now, on the export side, the BIS, Bureau of Industry Securities, within the Commerce Department that licenses exports, all of a sudden, on a Friday afternoon with no advance notice to the industry and less than an hour's notice to the Hill, put in place a 90-day pause on the export of firearms to a good part of the world. And they buried it. This was a Friday afternoon, and buried it in a frequently asked question. Like, how is that a frequently asked question, right? No one, like we found out about it. We alerted the Hill. I can tell you that bipartisan and bicameral, there was a lot of frustration about what BIS did. But they put this 90-day pause in place. It expires the end of this week. Somebody leaked a draft of a rule that BIS was working on that, we've gone through that and spoken with BIS. They don't deny the authenticity of the document. They just say, well, nothing's been decided. But a lot of the things that were are in that document, they've already implemented as policy. And they will put out some policy, and I think it will look substantially similar to this leaked document, that will make it more difficult for the industry to export firearms to countries that want them, that are, the government of that country is, signed off on the import of the firearms. And they're going to target semi-automatic firearms. And they hide behind the claim that this is all national security. Commerce's job is not national security. It's, it's to promote commerce and exports by the United States. And there really is no legitimate claim that, that we've heard, that BIS believes that the commercial export of firearms is promoting gun violence in other parts of the world, when, the number of firearms legally exported by the United States that ever even end up getting traced is like 1% of all of the firearms exported. And even those that are traced are like, on average, they were exported 6 years before. Like, for the ones that do end up getting traced. So it's like there's just no support for that notion. And again, guns are smuggled. That's not the industry. That's a law enforcement issue. So anyway, we continue to struggle with that, and we're working the issue on the Hill to try to prevent this. And I think we will see more efforts by the Biden administration between now and Election Day to harass and damage the industry. So, as another example, there is an effort afoot by Senate Democrats, House Democrats, and 20 Democrat attorney generals to convince the Department of Defense to not allow the commercial utilization of the Lake City Arsenal, which is a DoD facility. It's run under contract now by Winchester. It's been run by other companies in the past. And going back to 2001 and the ramp up to the Iraq and Afghanistan war, Lake City, half the machines were mothballed, not operational. And so when they needed a surged ammunition for the warfighter, it wasn't possible. And so the DoD had to go to other foreign nations to get ammunition for U.S. warfighters. And so DoD properly said, we're never going to let this happen again. We want this facility operational, fully operational in case we have a surge, which, look at the world today, that could happen in a moment's notice. So the vendor, going back to 2001, which at the time was ATK, not Winchester, you can sell to the commercial market, ammunition manufactured at the plant. A piece of those sales is plowed back into the facility.
This is just solid ball ammunition we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's
this military grade thing.
It's not. I mean, the primary rifle round used by the United States military is proprietary and is not allowed to be sold by the contractor into the commercial market. So you're talking about M855 green tip ball ammunition that is imported from other countries into the United States and manufactured by other manufacturers and is widely used for target shooting. So, acceding to this pressure would degrade military readiness. And given the situation in the world today, that seems like a particularly foolish decision or policy choice, right? And again, the consumers that purchased that ammunition coming out of Lake City are actually subsidizing the military because a portion of those sales gets plowed right back into the factory for plant and equipment and, all
innovation,
these things.
all sorts of things that go on.
Yeah, so that the factory is, operational and can respond to a surge in demand for the military, which it wasn't able to do in 2001. So it's good policy choice. It benefits the taxpayer by reducing the cost of ammunition for the military. And again, this idea that, it's a clever rhetorical device the other side uses, military style, military grade. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, military grade. It's not used by the military, and the military uses 12-gauge shot shell and 9mm ammunition. Is that military grade that can't be sold to the public? I mean, it's just sophistry by the gun control groups.
It's hard to find a firearm type that hasn't been used both by consumers and by police forces or military. There's a long relationship between the American consumer and our military and police forces.
I mean, your standard, right, like a bolt-action rifle based on the Mauser design, the 30-06 Springfield, it's a ubiquitous hunting cartridge. I have a rifle in 30-06. Well, that was used in World War I. Does that mean that's a quote-unquote military grade ammunition that, it's just a ridiculous argument. It's just, it doesn't withstand even a modicum of scrutiny. But it's politics, right? I mean, they want to cut off the supply as much as possible of ammunition that gets used in modern sporting rifles. And by the way, we just came out with an updated estimate on the number of modern sporting rifles in civilian possession since 1990 when, the government data is really available. And it's now over 28 million, up from 24 million a couple of years ago. And, the number of, we're working on an updated estimate on the number of detachable magazines, and that's going to be a big, big number.
I don't know how you can count them.
You can't, right? You can just estimate based on, a couple of factors. We're trying to survey industry members, roughly how many. So the estimate we come up with will be a very conservative estimate, but it's not something that was ever counted or required to be counted, but it's enormous, right? It's the other side tries to argue that it's not commonly owned or commonly used, and so therefore it's not even an arm. It's not protected by the Second Amendment at all, which is to me a very specious argument. So
I don't see it. You can with AR-type rifles when there's what? Yeah, you're saying 28 million now. I didn't realize it was that high. I thought it was 24, 25 million. So wow.
Yeah, it was a number of years ago, and that's through 21, I think, maybe 22, but I think it was 21. And so it's even really higher than that when you add in what's gone on the last couple of years. And this again is from 1990 because that's when the government data was collected that we can sort of we can rely on. But as you know, the modern sporting rifle has been on the commercial market since 1963 with the Colt Sporter. So it's been around a long time.
Semi-automatic design is late 19th century invention.
Yeah, it's nothing.
It's been around forever.
For a very long time.
So we've gone through a bunch of topics here. What I'm hearing is they're going after the industry financially, import-export. They want to financially punish the industry to put it down. Going after FFLs, firearms guns dealers, stop them from selling guns to the common person.
Right.
They want to take away the PCLA in order to bankrupt firearms manufacturers, which would if they had to pay for lawsuits based on illegal misuse of their own products. Car companies would go out of business. Baseball manufacturers would go out of business.
Exactly.
Everything would go out of business with that kind of thing going on. So they're financially trying to punish this in every way. I'm down on the SHOT Show floor. I see it busier than ever. I see millions of new gun owners. Yeah. All the gun trainers I talk to, they can't have enough classes. They have so
That's
many
exactly
people.
right, yeah.
It's so busy out there. So many people picking up their freedom. So I'm still really positive, the Biden administration is doing all this. How are you feeling?
We have our challenges, but we will prevail. We had dark days back in the late 90s. We prevailed. And you're correct. There are more gun owners in the United States now than ever before. There are 475 at least million firearms in civilian possession in the United States. More than half of the households have a firearm. And like you say, the demographics of gun owners are rapidly changing. We see more women, more African Americans, more Asian Americans, more Hispanic Americans, and more recently, since October 7th, we've seen evidence from news reports and dealers that there's been a marked increase in the number of Jewish Americans who purchased firearms because of the rise of anti-Semitism across the United States. So, and we certainly saw an enormous increase during COVID when people were concerned about instability. Then we saw, the violence and the crime that took off in the summer of 20 and 21, in response to the whole BLM and the rioting. So people got concerned for their own self-protection, their family's protection, and they purchased a firearm, exercised their Second Amendment rights. And so you're right, ranges are packed, training classes are packed. I mean, it's and I don't see that stopping or subsiding anytime soon.
Now we're coming into an important election where President Biden is running again, and the Biden administration wants to destroy the industry you represent. But here they are, busy.
Yeah, I mean, he's decided to make this a hallmark of his presidency and the re-election. He talks about, banning modern sporting rifles and all these things. But I am hopeful that gun owners will come out and vote this November. It's critical, not just obviously for the industry, for the future of the Second Amendment, but I would say really for the future of this country. It's very, very troubling, and and unfortunately, through his feckless leadership, President Biden has made the world a very dangerous place.
And that's not reported enough. I wish the media would talk more about that. So I use NSSF resources all the time. The data, all the stuff you guys do.
Glad to hear it.
Now point people to it. Where can they go to find all the stuff you're doing?
So our website is nssf.org, and we have a ton of information on our website, research reports and safety information, lots and lots of where to hunt, where to find a range. So chock full of information. It's frankly kind of overwhelming at times, but you can find these research reports. We put out a blog, covers a lot of topical issues. And you can sign up to get our weekly newsletter, bullet points, and we try to keep people informed, provide resources to our members, and we give use that as a way to communicate information to elected representatives, people in the administration, as well as the mainstream media. We're constantly directing the mainstream media to our what we call our fact sheets that cover a broad range of topics like modern sporting rifles and things like that. So
please keep it up with them, especially with the media.
Absolutely.
I know too many. I am one, and I've been around them enough, and they need the education.
They do. They're not informed. Particularly in big city newsrooms, they tend to have a liberal bias and are not, if they're not openly hostile to the Second Amendment to guns, they just are uninformed entirely and don't, just sort of consume the media narrative that's just
I wouldn't
false.
call that a liberal bias. I call it an illiberal bias because they want to take away this basic human right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Larry.
Great to see you. Hope you have a great SHOT Show. Thanks.